Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Chauvin has been found guilty by a jury of his peers on multiple counts, including murder. And the question that we're looking at is not so much that decision specifically, but what's next? This is something that Lance and I talked about earlier in the week, and we thought it was important to bring up to you all. Since that has come down, there's been a few other things going on, including, I'm sure as some of you have heard, the Columbus police officer shooting a 16-year-old who was going at another young person with a knife. And so there's been a number of different things going on, and they're kind of all getting intermixed. And in some ways, we might want to talk about them holistically. In other ways, I think it's important to distinguish them. So our goal today with you all is to ultimately talk about the incident in Columbus, the verdict with Chauvin, and then also what now? What's next, right? Where do we go from here? So we've got a lot to talk about. Hopefully it's something that we can all identify and care about. I think it's imperative that as a nation, we decide, what do we expect from our law enforcement? What tools do we give them to do the job? And also the larger issues behind when they're having to come into situations in the first place. So there's no way we can talk about it all in 38 minutes, but we'll do our best to get through as much of it as we can. And of course, we couldn't begin this critical conversation without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, if you're like me, I have a level of frustration, and that's for all this right now. It's like, what do we do? Where do we go? Something needs to be done. But so that's our word of the day, not to minimalize anything at all. But, you know, the word frustrate is a verb, frustrate, and it means to cause or to have no effect, to bring to nothing, to counteract or to nullify, or to prevent from achieving an objective. What that means to me is that we watch what goes on and we see the different things that are going on, and we're like, why is there nothing changing? Why does it seem like nothing is changing? And then we have different incidents, and it's also frustrating because it looks like no matter what the incident, they're all being grouped together. And the question comes up, and again, it's a question. Should all of these be grouped under the same discussion? And that's part of what we're going to take a look at today. Remember, this show is all about having the conversation, and we don't have all the answers, but we want to take just a look at some things and ask the questions to get the conversation started, so maybe we can end some of this frustration.
So, Lance, today let's start with Chauvin, right, and the verdict there. I think in a lot of ways, substantive, if for no other reason, forget about if people agree with it or not, the nature of finding a police officer guilty of all three counts in a case like this is significant, if nothing else. Maybe not monumental. The question is, though, right, does it make an appreciable difference in the cause of police reform? And I think here's part of the challenge that you and I have discussed some, is what exactly is the cause? And that's not, I don't know who exactly to address that at either, because it's a difficult thing. We all know, like you expressed, a lot of people are frustrated. A lot of people feel like we got to do something. I'm not sure that there's been answers submitted that we have a holistic agreement upon, a majority agreement upon what do we do about this.
I think there was first a sense of relief when the verdict came down, because we were all so surprised by verdicts in our lifetime. I know that I mentioned Rodney King to you, and you're of an age where you didn't know what was meant by that, and not to divert attention. But after some of the decisions that some of us that were a little bit older have seen, there was a sense of relief that, okay, the right thing was done, that whether Mr. Floyd was guilty of any crime or not, what happened to him was not equal to what he might or might not have done incorrectly. And so there was a sense of relief that, okay, as unfortunate as this whole situation was, the right decision was made and that the person, the officer in this case, was out of line. And okay, great. But what do you do about it? And everybody says, well, we need change. And I guess that's the word that I hear, but nobody's off. Okay, what do you mean by that word? Because change to Justin could mean one thing. Change to me might mean another thing. And to you, the listener, could mean a third thing. But we're all saying, well, this needs to change. But nobody's getting into the nuts and bolts of, okay, what is that change that we all want? And then there are those people that maybe say they don't want any change. But we've got to get away from these words that to me don't mean anything. And like you said, get into this discussion of what is it that we want to see changed? What is it that needs to be done differently so that these kind of things don't occur? Because I've talked to you, and what I don't understand is we have this worldwide case focused on it. And in the same town, another young man is shot and killed by a police officer, stated that they were reaching for their taser, not their gun, but picked up their gun out of their belt and shot this young man. But again, it was for a traffic violation, an expired license plate, for goodness sakes. And I think that to me symbolized, well, what's really, obviously this whole Chauvin case had not brought attention to the local police, because then they still reach a level of violence for a non-violent offense. And I think that to me is a key part of today's discussion that we're going to have. Is there, and maybe some people would say there isn't, but is there a difference between a violent offender and what the police choose to do and what non-violent offenders have done and what the police choose to do? To me, there is a difference. To others, there may not be. And maybe that's where we need to start the conversation. But that's where I want to get into, let's just not use words to say, well, we need change. What is it that we want to change? And let's find some agreement there.
I think it's a good point, because differentiating is essential in trying to make some informed decisions about what do we want to see change. Because again, to your point, it's nice to call for change, but we also need to have an idea of what we want to make change. And you can say that's the responsibility of our lawmakers. Obviously, they're not getting that done very well. I think one of the things that we're going to talk about is, so what do you do? Ultimately, for those wondering, I think you kind of outlined it and hinted at it, but in the incident of George Floyd, right, and the police officer, Michael Chauvin, the situation is you have something nonviolent happening and somebody loses their life as a result of multiple factors. But as a direct result of, if the officer hadn't done what he did, that guy would be alive today. Hence murder, right? I mean, we now call it murder because that's what it is, according to a jury of his peers. He murdered another man. Now, just it may not matter to some people, they did find him guilty of unintentional murder. In other words, they didn't say his plan going into this was to kill this man, Now, he killed the man, and he made bad decisions along the way that resulted in that death. But his intention was probably not to murder him, Of course, there's only one person in the world that really knows what their intention was. So I think, is it an important step? Yes, because it should demonstrate to Americans what we all are told but don't always see. No one is above the law. And in this instance, an officer not only didn't follow proper protocol or training, but it resulted in the death of somebody that shouldn't have died.
Well, and I think the biggest thing for me, and again, this may be part of our differences in experience, was that other police officers stepped forward and said this was not the right tactic. And there is that, we've all read about it, the unwritten code among the police that you don't rat out each other, that you stand behind each other, because it's kind of an us versus them mentality. And for me, having heard that and watched that and read about that throughout my life, to see current police officers step forward and say, no, these actions are not what we were trained to do. This was not what we all have been taught to do in this situation. And to speak out against the actions of a fellow officer, I thought was a huge step forward towards finding some answers. I thought that as far as the whole trial, other than the verdict, was to see fellow officers stepping forward and saying, this is not what we're trained to do.
So I think that's an important distinction between cases, but also when you're talking about what do you want to see change. We have to be careful about lumping all incidents together because two things. One, I think it can make it more difficult to decide what change you want to take. And two, when you do take a change, you're going to be disappointed with the results because it's not a very, you're not tailoring it to a specific thing. You're saying, well, we want change. So we're going to do things like, and I don't want to turn the discussion all into defund the police, but that's been like the one thing that's kind of been offered up, right? As the primary, conversation point, at least during the presidential election, is, well, that's what we need to do. That'll fix it.
Or it's not right and we can't do it. So we're not going to do anything.
Right.
I mean,
those are basically the two.
It's been, okay, we're going to defund the police and just do away with them or whatever that means, or we're going to keep things the same. And that's not, neither one of those is a good answer.
And so we're going to, again, continue to talk about what happens in the aftermath. But here we want to talk about the other incident that's kind of been at the forefront, which is what happened in Columbus with a police officer shooting a 16-year-old who appears to have been lunging at somebody else with what appears to be, again, a relatively large knife. You can watch the video for yourself. We're going to discuss that coming up. And we're also going to look at kind of talk about what's next. And naturally, part of that discussion will be, what do police officers make? What does their training look like? Because that's some of the discussion about what may need to change. So we've got a lot more to talk about. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
So we turn, Lance, to Columbus, Ohio, right? We talked about Chauvin, the trial, what he was found guilty of. Ultimately, I think it sounds like you and I feel the right verdict was reached, not necessarily upset by the result, given what took place. Now, the sentencing component, still haven't heard about. But I thought somebody made a good point the other day and said, the point is that he was found guilty of these crimes. The sentencing, sure, I think, we can care about it. But that's a bigger conversation about criminal justice reform and, how long you put people away for and all of that kind of stuff. But the Columbus, Ohio incident, I think in many ways is very substantially different.
Well, and the interesting, and the reason that the two are, you'd say, well, why are they connected? One took place in Minnesota, and another took place in Ohio. And what's the connection? Well, the connection is, if you haven't realized this, that the Columbus incident took place the very afternoon that the Chauvin verdict was decided upon. So that immediately made this connection. Like, okay, a police officer was found guilty, and 2 hours later, this 16-year-old female is shot by a police officer and killed. And that, when you stop right there, kind of an interesting connection. Like, oh my goodness, okay. But as you start to read and you watch the video and you then have this discussion, the question arises, these are being connected by some, but the question is, should they be connected? Are they incidents of the same thing, of undeserved police violence versus minorities? Are both of these the same? That's the question I ask. Right? We're going to talk about it, give our opinions, let us know what you think. Email us at podcast@thestateofus.org. But that's the question. Okay. They're both horrible situations. Don't get me wrong, but are they the same thing? Should they be put in the same sentence, in the same discussion? When we go back to saying, what is it that we want to see change? about how the police handle situations. Are they the same incident? Are they the same thing? Two different incidents. Should they be handled the same way?
I'm going to give it away at the beginning that my answer is no. I think I've watched the video more than once of what happened with George Floyd and the former police officer Michael Chauvin, and I've watched the footage from the Columbus officer's body cam footage, and I'm not sure how, if you're honest with yourself and you watch both videos, you're going to say it's the same issue at hand. Are there issues? Yeah, I think there's issues with both. I don't think they're the same thing at all, because to your point, when we were talking about what Chauvin did versus what this officer did, Chauvin, again, it was a nonviolent situation. The man wasn't being violent. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't threatening anybody else.
Well, his crime, if there was one, was passing a counterfeit bill.
Right.
He wasn't armed.
Yeah.
He wasn't threatening a clerk. Mr. Floyd wasn't doing any of those things when he committed his crime, of what he was being charged with.
At most, you've got him right for trying to pass a fake bill and possibly, consuming illegal drugs. Neither of which I would hope that most people in this country don't think that trying to pass that those two things warrant death.
Right.
Right. Should we let people get away with them? No. Should they die because of those things? No.
Even our criminal justice system doesn't say that.
Right. You're not going to get the death penalty
punishment for those crimes. Even in our harshest states aren't to the same level of a violent crime.
Well, take, for example, right, even with the verdict, even with what this police officer did, even being found guilty of murder, he's not facing the death penalty.
Well, I'm not sure the state of Minnesota doesn't have that. I haven't done all my research, but again, the justice system is a state by state decision.
Right.
Some states you would get the death penalty for what
in the state
Mr.
though that
Chauvin
he's found
did.
Guilty in.
It
doesn't warrant for him to lose his life. So how would it make any sense for somebody that passed a counterfeit bill? Maybe, because of course that was never tried, so we don't know, allegedly, and was allegedly again using illegal drugs.
But that same afternoon in Columbus,
right?
What was going on, in your opinion, as you watch the video? And if you haven't seen it, folks, as Justin said, you can get on and watch it yourself. It's out there, and it is the police.
We've got
body
it linked
cam video
at thestateofus.org. It's Channel 10 WBNS, the CBS affiliate out of Columbus. And this is right in our backyard, folks. We're 45 minutes, from the outer edge of Columbus, where we're at. So, it's.
But you said, no, they're not the same.
No.
And we digressed a little bit.
Yeah.
What makes you think there's a difference between the Floyd case?
I've got the video paused right here, Lance, and this is just the thumbnail, the default image that shows for the video, and you can see what I'm looking at. And I think even without playing the video, where this is frozen right now tells you a whole lot about the situation. What you can see is there is a young woman closest to us, right? She has her arm back and to the side. She is turned to the side in a stance. It reminds you of what somebody would do to throw with their arm, like if you were going to throw a ball or if you were going to underhand a softball. It's in between those two, right? Back and to the side. I am cocked back to swing forward, right? And in her hand, very apparently, is a large, sharp object. It's got to be every bit of 4 or 5, maybe 6 or 7 inches. And it is a knife, again, do we know that 100% right now? No, because the investigation's not done. But I think that most people looking at this would conclude whatever that thing is, I don't want to get hit with it.
Well, and the person is encroaching on another person
who is pushed up against a car,
who has no place to go because they are leaning back against a car. So they are kind of trapped, and the person with the object in their hand, we're going to call it a knife, is stepping towards that person pinned to the car.
I think, basically you've got a girl, and we're saying girl because she's,
we're
was
saying that
16.
because we know that now.
Right.
There's not necessarily, do we know that the officer knew that when he's driving up to the scene?
In fairness, looking at this, I wouldn't guess that this person was 16. And I don't think that's a reaction or anything. I mean, I can't even see her face from here. All I can see is her back.
But again, is that part of the discussion? And we can get into that. Is that what we're saying here is we have someone with what appears to be a knife heading towards someone that they look like they are wanting to use the knife on this person in a violent manner.
And again, watch it because,
but watch it for yourself.
We can describe it all we want. We've watched it just before we came on the air. We watched it again twice, and it's not very long. And I don't know what else this girl in the black would be planning to do. I guess put it that way. It's not like she's holding it like, I'm thinking about threatening you. I mean, she has one arm forward, is almost trying to grab onto the lady that is in the pink. Her arm is cocked back. She's in a stance that you would be in to, lunge your arm forward with force. Again, this is what people are going to parse, and you can do it all the different ways. But what it came down to is, I told you, Lance, I heard a federal officer the other day in an interview saying, we can talk about the training, right? And maybe we want the training to be changed. But the question about, did this officer do what his training told him to do? He said, I don't know the Columbus Police's specific policy, but what I'll tell you at the federal level is that we are taught in a situation where there is a deadly weapon in play, and a knife from a federal standard is considered a deadly weapon. If there is a deadly weapon in play, as a federal officer, we are supposed to, trained to meet or exceed the force of what that weapon is. And that would mean, in this instance, you need something that is a knife or stronger than a knife, a gun, that is what you're trained to do.
And to your point, this is what the federal officer was trained to do.
Exactly.
And the assumption is that probably the Columbus police have the same sort of
similar training.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about their training. Okay.
Yeah. And then the other question becomes, in order to use the force, because meeting the force doesn't necessarily mean, pulling the trigger, right? It means somebody's got a knife out, I'm going to pull a gun out or a knife, but in an officer's instance, if you're going to stop somebody, you're probably not going to pull out a knife against somebody with a knife, or the only way to get to them is, you're going to get injured probably. So you pull out your gun. Now, in order to shoot, that's where you get to the second part, right? Which is my life or somebody else's life in imminent danger,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, not a police officer, not a professional background. I have a hard time looking at this and saying that her life is not in imminent danger. I mean, it looks like it's in imminent danger. The position of the knife, where she looks like she's going, that's what it appears to be.
Well, and we can supposition, but let's just throw this out here because I did it to you in the pre-show meeting that we had. What if the officer doesn't fire and the person with the knife thrusts it repeatedly into the lady in the pink, and the lady in the pink dies? Now is the officer in trouble because they didn't do what they were trained to do? And people are like, but okay, if he doesn't shoot and stop the attacker, the possible outcome is that somebody else is going to die. That's my point. This is a horrible situation. You have to decide between who's going to get hurt, the person who is defenseless or the person with the weapon. And I'm not sure that, I know I'm not trained to make that decision, but I would hope that the Columbus police are, or police forces are. And that's where it's not what I said at the beginning of this. I don't see these as the same case. Are there similarities? Yes. Is there a black person who is dead at the hands of a police officer? There's the similarity. But the two cases and the two incidents, to me, couldn't be any further apart. And that's why I have a hard time putting them together to have this discussion about police reform, whatever that change is that we want to see. I don't think they're the same situation and therefore shouldn't be used in the discussion.
They're different.
It's not fair to be used in the discussion as what do we want to see changed? This is murder just like George Floyd was murder. And is it horrible that a young person lost their life? Sure. Is it horrible that anybody loses their life? I think so. And do we need to have that discussion? Are we going to start putting a value on, well, this person's, I used to do that all the time in my classroom. The moral ambiguity of, is it better for the mom to die or the dad to die or for the children to die or for the parent to die or
we all draw the lines.
Yeah. We all have a different opinion, but shouldn't we just say that any human life that is taken unexpectedly is not a good thing?
Here's the other thing I want people to think about before the next segment, Lance, is, and again, you can send us your comments, think about it and tell us your thoughts. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. Just because one person did something wrong, does it make it okay for another person to do something wrong? And the reason I bring that up is I've heard some discussion about, well, they were arguing and right, the girl in the pink may have been, causing trouble and, but the girl in the pink has no weapon on her, right? So, and we go over this, you reviewed this for how many years with students, right? Just because this student student A yelled at student B doesn't suddenly make it okay for student B to start yelling, right?
Right.
Just because the lady in the pink said some awful things to the lady in the black, right, doesn't all of a sudden make it okay for the lady in the black to take out a knife and stab her. The other thing that people need to think about as we're going over the break, because this is the one where people are bringing race into it, right? It's a white officer shooting a black person. Do you think, and there's only, again, there's only one person that really knows the answer. Would this officer have made the same decision if this was a white person about to stab another person, a white person or a black person? Because if you want to go this may be a justified decision, but not a right decision. Was the decision influenced by race? We would all hope, right, that even if we don't like the outcome of this, the decision would have been made identically regardless of race. The question is, was it made that way? And again, I'm sure that's subject to the investigation. So the big question is, where do we go from here? And we've got some interesting data to share. Let us know your thoughts. Email podcast@thestateofus.org. And we've got more to talk about. Keep it here, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Okay, so we've talked about two different incidents, Lance, right? Is your feeling, just to be clear with people, the incident in Ohio, the George Floyd incident, these are very different situations.
Both tragic situations, but I think the circumstances don't warrant putting them in the same discussion.
Or don't warrant trying to answer them with a blanket statement about it's simply a black-white police brutality thing. Because I think, we're discussing them in the same show, right? So we have to be sensitive to that. But part of what we're trying to point out is, look, it is possible to say that what happened, what former Officer Chauvin did and was convicted of murder, that was wrong.
From what I've read, what the Columbus police officer in that situation did was what he was trained to do. Now, if we want to have a discussion that we want to change the training and say in those situations we want them to do something else, then I'm open to having that discussion. But I think the Chauvin trial made it clear that former Officer Chauvin did not follow training and protocol. And that's what I'm clarifying as the difference. Now, if we want to have the discussion and say, we want to change the way police officers are trained, then I'm open to having that discussion and coming to some sort of agreement. But I think in the Columbus situation, the officer did what they're trained to do.
Yeah, I mean, the investigation may come back and they may say what we as non-professionals who don't have a law, background of any kind, law enforcement or law degree, we're just looking at it and saying, based on what we know about the training, right, it looks like he did what the training would tell him to do.
It's a tragic outcome to a horrible situation.
Sure.
But the police officer did what they were trained to do. That could be the decision. And then it opens up the discussion of change. Okay, what we need to change then is the training protocol.
Here's what I want to share with you, Lance, is there's an article from Forbes, again, linked at thestateofus.org, that shares information about police officer salary. Because we talked about one of the common discussions is, defund the police. And there's a lot of different ideas, folks, about what that means, just to be clear, right? There's some ideas about that doesn't mean pay police officers less. It means let's take money that we spend on law enforcement and have some law enforcement, but reallocate it to things like mental health and, other things, right? Preventative measures. There are things that say, let's, pay police officers less, or let's not have police. Those are more on the outskirts of the conversation. So there's a lot of different things that people can mean by that. But here's what I want to talk about, Lance. The range, the number one state with the lowest, police officer average salary is Mississippi, with an average salary of $36,290. The state with the highest average is California, with $105,220. Okay. So that's your approximate average range is from $36,000 to $105,000. So it's a pretty substantive spread. I don't know about you, but living on $36,000 versus living on $105,000.
But like we've talked about before with our, minimum wage scale being based on where you live, I think those are pretty comparable numbers as far as the style of life you can have in the state of Mississippi versus the style of life in California. That money is going to get you basically the same thing in both states. So while the numbers are wide apart, that's basically the difference of what it costs to live in those two different places.
So your national average annual wage for a police officer is $67,600.
And depending on where you live, that's either a lot of money or it's not enough money. This was stated by none other than Pat Robertson on the 700 Club, which I was sharing with you. A gentleman who basically started the conservative religious right movement, ran for president, won the Iowa caucuses against George Bush back in, I think it was 1988. Went on his television show and said, maybe we need to look at what we pay police officers because maybe we're not getting the best people to apply for the job. And he wasn't disparaging the people that are doing the job. He's just saying, from looking at it from a business aspect, if you want to get the best applicants, you need to offer the best package of employment. And I think any business person would tell you that if you want to get the best people to work for you, you better offer them one of the best pay packages so that you can get the best applicants. And Pat Robertson's point, as a conservative media person and political person, said, maybe that's where we need to take a look at things. Maybe we could get a better pool of applicants for new police officers if we offered a better pay package. And I think that's where you're going with this.
People want quick, sweeping change, right? Things that are easy to understand, things that can happen fast. And this is one, I said it. The last time we talked about this, Lance, I'm remembering very clearly. I said, if we're talking about this again in a few months, we're probably going to say the same thing again, which is it is unfortunately not a super simple solution, because you could say the solution is just quit giving the money to the police, give it to other services, and that'll fix it, right? You could say, let's give more money to the police, because if we pay people, we should get a better pool of applicants, which I do generally think is a step in the right direction. But at the same time, somebody might counter and say, well, Minnesota, right? Minneapolis in Minnesota's ranked 14th in the nation. They pay $71,840 as of 2019. So, I mean, No, is that fantastic money? I mean, I don't know about you. $71,000 in Minnesota. I mean, that's not bad. That's not bad. It's top 20 in the country, right? So at the same time, I think it's also a question of how are we spending the money that we're allocating? And what do we expect from police? Because I think there's also some issues there. I'm not sure that as a country, if you polled us, that you would get a consistent answer about what is law enforcement's job. Because see there, that's an important word. Law enforcement. Is that what we want them to be? Maybe it's not, and maybe that's part of the problem. They are law enforcement. Their job is to enforce laws that exist, to stop people from doing bad things, right? Or to catch people that do bad things. Those are different. Do we want them to do both of those things? Because they're very different, and the training you need for those things are not the same. Stopping somebody from doing a bad thing, like in Columbus, Ohio, stopping somebody from stabbing somebody else with a knife. That's not the same thing as pulling somebody over for, a forged bill. And maybe part of the issue is that we're asking these people to do all of that, and we're asking these people to do all that for the money they're making and the limited money that we have to train them. I think it's real easy to just offset it on the people, right? And say, well, it's just their fault because they're racists and they're, and some of them are racists, right? And I don't doubt it, no question. Are most of them racists? I don't think so. And I don't think that most of them are out to try to kill innocent people either. But that doesn't mean that we've equipped them properly or that we've set expectations accordingly.
I know, Justin, from talking to you and the years we've done this show, that there is common ground. So we can get some things changed. And let's start making that change happen. But let's make it a finite. Let's get an agreement on what those changes are. But you're right. We've had that conversation today, and it was a difficult one. But here at True Chat, we try to have these conversations because we want to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we're in agreement that these are tragedies and that we need to see some change. What is that change? And let's have that discussion. If you like the show, make sure you tell your friends about it, have them listen to us. You can find us on Overcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and anywhere fine podcasts are found.
The State of Us is a syndicated radio program heard on the weekends in select talk markets around the nation. We're also a podcast released Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. Eastern Time. So make us part of your week. If you would, please subscribe, tell your friends about us. That's how we keep these honest conversations going. And I think it's a difficult thing to do in today's world, but Lance and I are trying to take that challenge on, and we thank you for being part of it. Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch. And thank you all for tuning in. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.